For nearly 7.5 decades, Superman has been a pop culture icon with several reimaginings and retellings. With an ever-changing rogue gallery, Superman has changed a lot over the years, but has always kept his one main philosophy and undertone: truth and justice. It all started with two boys, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who met in high school. Joe grew up in poverty and worked as a newspaper boy for the Toronto Daily Star, which could have influenced the name for the paper Lois and Clark worked at in Earth 2, or the DC Golden Age world, the Daily Star. Jerry had a very different origin. He had a big family with lots of support for his hobbies of watching movies and reading pulps. However, just 6 years before Action Comics hit the newsstand, Jerry's father suffered a fatal heart attack while his store was being robbed in 1932. Had Jerry's father not died, Superman could have turned out a very different character, and definitely would not have made the impact it had today. In 1933, the first attempt at Superman made a dark, grim, evil mastermind hell-bent on ruling the world with his newfound powers, a little different from the truth, justice, and American way Superman we know so well today. Shortly after, Siegel rewrote the character into a hero. The Superman we know and love today was still on the way, but the main problem is it needed to be published. It took 5 years for the book to be published, but finally Action Comics #1 was published, introducing Superman himself. The book was initially a success, and all that happened was that the sales figures grew, and it just went up from there. Jerry and Joe finally got Superman published, and several other popular characters along with Superman were created this decade. Superman was a hit, and after about 1 year of Action Comics, Superman got his own book by his own name, Superman, as well a daily comic strip under his name as well. The book was what depressed America needed, getting them out of the mindset of poverty and despair and into the mindset of the most powerful man alive.
In the endless reaches of the universe, there once existed a planet known as Krypton, a planet that burned like a green star in the distant heavens. There, civilization was far advanced and had brought forth a race of supermen whose mental and physical powers were developed to the absolute peak of human perfection. But there came a day when giant quakes threatened to destroy Krypton forever. One of the planet's leading scientists, sensing the approach of doom, placed his infant son in a small rocket ship and sent it hurtling in the direction of the Earth just as Krypton exploded. The rocket ship sped through star-studded space, landing safely on Earth with its precious burden, Krypton's sole survivor. A passing motorist found the uninjured child and took it to an orphanage. As the years went by and the child grew to maturity, he found himself possessed of amazing physical powers. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive.
By the 1940s, Superman broke into multimedia with Fletcher's Studio Superman cartoons,
Superman! To best be in a position to use his amazing powers in a never-ending battle for truth and justice, Superman has assumed the disguise of Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter for a great metropolitan newspaper.
successful serials, a radio show, a novel, and a play in the 1940s World Fair. The 40s also brought Superman into another great book featuring him and Batman in World's Finest. Several new characters were introduced in the 1940s for Superman, such as Throughout the rest of the 40s, Superman would often fight small supervillains like Toyman, or would often fight world powers like the Nazis. For example, in the February 1940 Look magazine, Superman took out Hitler and ended his reign in just one page. Superman was not the only superhero around. Following his success came characters like Dollman, Green Lantern, Batman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Bulletman, Blue Beetle, and some shameless rip-offs like Will Eisner's original Wonder Man, a character much like Superman in looks and concept. DC sued them, and Wonder Man was cancelled after just one issue. But that was not the only superhero copying the Man of Steel. There was also Captain Marvel, a young boy who gets his powers from magic, and when he says Shazam, he becomes Captain Marvel, a man strikingly similar to Superman in looks, size, and even similar superpowers. DC sued Fawcett, the owner of Captain Marvel, and had a fairly long trial. Captain Marvel and his supporting cast were pulled out of production. By the mid-40s, Superman also gained a younger counterpart, Superboy. This was Clark Kent in Smallville as a younger boy, and recalling his adventures from a younger standpoint. The 1950s Superman comics decreased in quality as the war and depression were over, and Superman would be caught in very similar stories, fighting a gang or a villain in very campy situations. It was just a dull time. However, the 50s were very exciting for Superman in film as he had two serials, a short film. He appeared in the popular show I Love Lucy and had a hugely popular TV show spanning 6 seasons and 104 episodes. The show starred George Reeves, who unfortunately committed suicide 14 months after the show was canceled in 1959, but many people speculate otherwise. The 50s introduced a more interactive DC universe, with Superman teaming up with Batman issue by issue in World's Finest. Also, some brief appearances with other characters such as Green Arrow. The Comics Code of Authority was introduced on March of 1955, or Superman issue 96, which prohibited violence and several other things in the comics. The 60s were the second coming of superhero comics. By the 50s, superhero comics were the minority to romance comics and horror comics. The golden age of comics was closing on a low note due to the Comics Code, but the second coming of superhero comics was coming. Great characters were reinvented to be better and more modern, like Green Lantern and Flash, as well as new team books like the Justice League. Superhero books were being pushed out more and more, just like the 40s, and the business at Marvel was just as good, with Hulk, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Thor, and the return of Captain America, and the beginning of the Avengers. The Man of Tomorrow was just as successful, with animated films and the New Adventures of Superman, as well as a musical. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. The 60s marked the last 10-cent Superman issue. This was the first price jump since Superman's premiere. The asking price was moved to 12 cents. In addition, the character got a newer, more space-age style with a new 60s outfit, and Superman wasn't as bulky, which is how the character continued to stand for years to come. The book also started to see slight improvements in quality and storytelling, as in the 50s many of the stories were just gimmicks that they throw Superman's way. Now Superman fought a villain of the week. Superman also started to team up with the Justice League rather than just the Caped Crusader time and time again.
You diseased maniac. Do you really think you could hide it from me by encasing it in lead? I'll mold this box into your prison bars. Don't touch that.
I told you. It's kryptonite, Superman. Little souvenir from the old hometown. I've spared no expense to make you feel right at home.
The 70s brought Superman into his first non-serialized movie, simply Superman the Movie. This movie, in many fans' opinions, was great. However, the best part was Christopher Reeves. Christopher was an unknown actor who the studio picked, and it was a great choice. Christopher looks a lot like the Man of Steel, and he could play the whole personality as well. And he became the template for later runs from artists. Most prominent is Superman 700, just the look of the cover. Superman also made it to a popular cartoon series, Super Friends, and the other various Super Friends cartoons spin-offs, as well as finally receiving a video game, Superman, for the Atari 2600. DC had an exciting time in the 70s. A lot of controversial series like Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and Batman series were being reinvented to be more serious and dark as they haven't been since the 40s. However, Superman didn't get the same treatment. He stayed at pretty much the similar level to what he was like in the 60s, and not much changed for him, unfortunately. In the 70s, Superman changed his occupation from working at the Daily Planet to joining Galaxy Broadcasting. It's a television network that Superman worked as a reporter on instead of the Daily Planet. The 80s brought Superman 3 sequels to his first classic film, as well as a spin-off movie for Supergirl. However, Supergirl and Superman 3 and 4 were not very good and not very well liked. Superboy also made it into the small screen with a live-action show, Superboy. It had several episodes before it was canceled in 1992. The video game was also a success for Superman as he gained 3 games, all entitled Superman. In the 1980s, DC began to think that their continuity was getting too messed up, so they decided to start from scratch with arguably the most important arc in comics, Crisis on Infinite Earths, in which the multiverse was being destroyed, and it was a job from world's greatest heroes from all the Earths to team up and contain the threat. However, the multiverse fell, but came out a new Earth. With the new Earth, they shifted the origins to have a more modern feel, but with the same great DC characters. This universe also combined DC's Earth 1 and Earth 2 to make it so that the JLA-JSA crossovers would happen without a complicated backstory of how this happened. Superman appeared in several comics in this decade, as well as his old stories. He appeared in Adventures of Superman, which was a continuation of Superman, as Superman Volume 2 started from scratch. A miniseries, Man of Steel, which reimagined the origin of Superman from the new DC universe. Superman also appeared in the famous miniseries Knight Returns, and adds a very interesting, fresh take to the Man of Steel. In the 90s, Superman made it back to live-action television with the show Lois and Clark, starring Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher. A cartoon spin-off of the cult classic Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, was made as well as having several games based off them for the 16 and 64-bit game consoles, including Superman 64, considered one of the worst games of all time. The 90s had a huge investors rush to the market, which caused an industry-wide crash later, mostly from greed from Marvel, DC, and Image in the 90s, who started to make cover variants. It was a super common thing for a cover to often have 2 to 4 variants. This whole bomb started with Superman 75, The Death of Superman. This was not meant to be a cash-in. The world got comic investing fever, so instead of just comic lovers buying it, you have people buying them to sell as a get-rich-quick scheme or an attempt to cash in for more money later. This resulted in variants and high print rates. This means when these people realized that it was worth nothing, people stopped buying them, and hence sales plummeted. Superman died in 1993 in the pages Superman 75, and when he was dead, DC teased several new Supermen to take his place. We had Superboy, Steel, Cyborg Superman, and Eradicator. However, it did not take long for DC to bring back Superman to flight. Cyborg Superman, who stirred up a scheme with Mongol, together they attempted to destroy Coast City, but this was foiled by the combined efforts of Superman, Green Lantern, Superboy, Steel, and Eradicator. DC continued to try and refine Superman in the 90s by marrying him to Lois, as well as splitting Superman into Superman Red, Superman Blue. However, it did not take long for DC to change him back to his old powers and suit. After 19 years, Superman finally got another Superman movie through Superman Returns. Bryan Singer attempted to bring back the feel of Superman 1 and 2 by basing it off of the first two movies. However, it was ignoring 3 and 4. Many reviewers were disappointed with this movie as it was not a 70s and 80s period piece, but rather in present time, as well as downgrading Superman's character for the story to work. However, in film, Superman was not completely ruined because the same year Superman the Richard Donner cut came out, which modified Superman 1 and 2 to combine them to be how Richard Donner would have originally liked it. It was well received by many. For example, Rotten Tomatoes gave it 88%. That's pretty good. Superman also got a TV show called Smallville. It was a CW drama that was well loved to a broader audience and took many creative turns, like not donning the Superman costume until the end of the show. This show lasted for several years. Superman also appeared strongly in cartoons, starting with Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, a very popular piece to the Bruce Timm animated universe. Superman also took the back seat to his dog, Krypto, in the Krypto the Superdog show. Superman also appeared in 4 DC animated films and 13 video games. Unfortunately, Superman in video games did not have any game classics like Batman did with the Arkham Asylum series. In the 2000s, DC did not try as big of a stunt as the death of Superman. However, DC did some very interesting things. Even though the rest of the early 2000s were fairly bland, we got several great miniseries such as All-Star Superman and Superman Red Sun. Red Sun got a motion comic and All-Star Superman got an animated film. Lex Luthor also ran for president in 2001. The 2000s also gave us the return of Kal-El. No, not Kal-El with the E, but rather Kal-El, the original Earth 2 Superman. Unfortunately, surviving the destruction of the multiverse wasn't enough for the Man of the Future, as he died in 2006's Imminent Crisis number 7 after being beat to death by Superboy Prime. However, this was not it for Superman Earth 2, as in the very popular Blackest Night series, Superman returned in the tie-in Blackest Night Superman, where he attacks New Earth Superman and Superboy. After his defeat, he was revived again and was used to attack the Justice Society of America. However, Power Girl was forced to destroy him by vaporizing him permanently.
What's the S stand for?
It's not an S.
How about super?
Excuse me. When the world finds out what you can do, it's gonna change everything.
Since 2010, Superman's appeared in 7 animated films. Superman has also been a main character in the critically acclaimed 2.5 Dimension Fighter in Justice Gods Among Us. The Man of Tomorrow is also getting a new film, finally rebooting the Superman series entitled Man of Steel on June 14th, with the Man of Steel being portrayed by Henry Cavill. As well, DC hopes to start a film franchise of the Justice League as a response to the highly successful Avengers movie. The 2010s brought back Superman's killer Doomsday by cloning him to reflect the death of Superman, except with Doomsday. Doomsday returns, of course, trying to kill Superman, but Doomsday has his own clone, like what Superman got in the Reign of Superman. This was Doomslayer. However, this arc was retconned because a month after it ended, the DC Universe was rebooted. With the DC reboot, Superman was restarted with a new armor and is no longer married to Lois. This made some fans mad, as Superman was married to Lois for a long time. As well, this is exactly what happens in the dreaded Spider-Man story One More Day. However, this allowed Superman to be with new people, and so DC decided to try Superman with Wonder Woman. Although many superheroes date in the office, Superman never really did. As well, Wonder Woman was originally created to be Superman's kind of female counterpart, and with that, it adds a little interesting depth and dynamic to the relationship. This may prove to work well for Superman's character in the future. Since the New 52 began, Superman had several brand new books, including Action Comics, which Action Comics 1 through 8 retold his origin in the new DC reboot style, Superman, which with some new adventures, Supergirl, and Superboy. As well, celebrating Superman's 75th anniversary and the Man of Steel coming out, DC's putting out 3 new books. Superman Batman, The Adventures of Superman, an anthology title that originally starts digitally, and Superman Unchained, the most advertised, written by Batman writer Scott Snyder and art by Jim Lee. This April, Superman finally turned 75. For literally a lifetime, Superman has inspired hope in generation after generation, inspiring comics, animated films, serials, cartoons, music, art, novels, theater, spin-offs. Superman made careers, inspired good, created myths, and hopefully Superman will continue to be cutting edge in these mediums. Now with digital publishing, Superman can be read for a lot cheaper than off the page, for a more casual audience. You also have a cheaper option of reading extremely pricey comics. Everybody knows Superman. He is a pop culture icon next to Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny. Superman will always evolve, whether it's a war, depression, or even just an average era. Superman can live it out because he can adapt to the changes and still mean what he's always meant to people, a symbol of justice.
This looks like a job for Superman.